I'm Odessa Vance, 29, and I have spent the last decade working as an elite freelance interpreter for the world's most dangerous negotiators. I stand in a dim, humid basement garage in Seoul, tucked into a charcoal blazer that hides the sweat pooling on my spine. The air smells of premium gasoline, wet concrete, and the cloying scent of expensive cologne. It is a suffocating mix that makes the bile rise in the back of my throat. To my left is Park Yi-ho, the leader of the city's most ruthless syndicate, a man who thinks I am just a quiet Korean-American girl with a law degree and a need for quick cash. He doesn't know about my past in Moscow. He doesn't know that my father was a diplomat who dragged me through the Eastern Bloc before I could walk. To him, I am just a mouthpiece, a tool to be used and discarded once the deal is done. To my right are four Russians who assume I am invisible because I haven't uttered a single word of their mother tongue since I walked into the room. They loom like mountains in ill-fitting leather jackets, their eyes scanning the perimeter with the bored detachment of predators. I keep my hands clasped in front of me. My knuckles are white. I force my breathing to remain shallow and even, matching the rhythm of the ventilation fan humming overhead. Park Yi-ho steps forward, his polished Oxfords clicking against the oil-stained floor. He gestures to the vehicle sitting in the center of the garage. It is a matte black sedan, sleek and menacing, wrapped in a giant red bow that looks grotesque against the dark metal. "Tell them I accept the gesture of goodwill," Park says in Korean, his voice smooth, betraying none of the violence he is capable of. "Tell them this solidifies our partnership for the shipping lanes in Busan." I nod, turning my head slightly toward the massive Russian in the center. He has a scar running through his left eyebrow and gold rings on every finger. I translate Park's words into perfect, neutral English. "That is the agreement. English is the bridge." "Mr. Park accepts your gift," I say, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. He agrees that this secures the Busan routes. The Russian leader, a man named Volkov, grins. It is a wolfish expression that doesn't reach his eyes. He nods at me, but he isn't looking at me. He is looking through me. "Excellent," Volkov replies in English. "Please tell Mr. Park that the engine is a custom build, German engineering, unbeatable." I translate. Park smiles, clearly pleased. He loves German engineering. He takes a step closer to the car, running a hand along the driver's side door. Then the atmosphere shifts. Volkov leans slightly toward the man on his right, a towering enforcer with a shaved head. They switch to Russian. They assume the sound of the ventilation fan covers their whispers. They assume the Korean girl in the blazer is deaf to their syntax. "Check the time," Volkov murmurs in Russian. My heart hammers against my ribs. It feels like a trapped bird. I keep my face completely blank. I focus on a crack in the concrete floor. "3 minutes," the enforcer replies in Russian, checking a heavy diver's watch on his wrist. Once he turns the ignition, the primary circuit engages. If he doesn't start it, the timer handles the rest. "Does the girl know?" the enforcer asks, nodding almost imperceptibly toward me. Volkov laughs softly, a guttural sound that makes my skin crawl. "Look at her, she's trembling just standing near us. She doesn't know a thing, she's just furniture." I swallow hard. The saliva in my mouth tastes like copper. Park is reaching for the door handle. He looks back at me, his eyes gleaming with the greed of a man who thinks he has won. "Ask them if the interior is leather," Park demands in Korean. I don't answer immediately. My brain is screaming. The interpreter's code is absolute. Remain neutral, translate only what is said, never intervene. If I speak now, if I reveal what I know, I shatter my cover. I become a liability to the Russians. I become a loose end. Odessa, Park snaps, his smile fading. I said ask them. He likes the car, Volkov says in Russian to his men, ignoring Park's Korean outburst. It will make a beautiful coffin, not much will be left of him to bury. Or the girl, the enforcer adds. Collateral damage, Volkov shrugs, unfortunate. The world narrows down to the tip of Park's finger hovering inches from the door handle. I can feel the heat radiating from the Russians behind me. They are relaxed. They are waiting for the fireworks. They think I am a porcelain doll, empty and fragile. I am not furniture. I am not collateral damage. My training kicks in, overriding the terror. My posture shifts. I unlock my hands. I look directly at Volkov. His smirk falters for a fraction of a second when he sees the change in my eyes. He sees the recognition. I turn my head slowly toward Park Yi-ho. The silence in the garage stretches, tight as a piano wire about to snap. Mr. Park, I say, my voice dropping an octave, losing the polite interpreter lilt and gaining the hard edge of a command. Park frowns, confused by my tone. What? I don't translate the question about the leather. I don't translate the praise for the German engineering. I look him dead in the eye, and for the first time in 10 years I break the code. Don't touch the door, I say in Korean, loud and clear. Step away from the vehicle. Park freezes. What are you doing? I turn back to Volkov. The Russian's face has gone from arrogant to murderous in the span of a heartbeat. He reaches into his jacket. I switch to Russian. My accent is flawless, sharpened by years of Moscow winters. You called me furniture. I spit the words at him, the consonants hard and biting. Volkov's eyes go wide. The shock hits him like a physical blow. I look back at Park, shouting now. The car is a bomb. I'm Odessa Vance, 29, and I have spent the last decade working as an elite freelance interpreter for the world's most dangerous negotiators. The air in the garage was thick enough to chew. It tasted of diesel fumes and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. I stood perfectly still. My heels were digging into the oil-stained concrete. I kept my hands clasped in front of my stomach. It was a defensive posture disguised as professional etiquette. The humidity in Seoul was oppressive, even underground. I could feel a bead of sweat tracing a slow, cold line down the center of my spine. I ignored it. I ignored the itch of my blazer against my damp skin. My job was to be invisible. My job was to be a voice and nothing else. Park Yi-ho stood to my left. He was radiating the kind of nervous energy that gets people killed. He smoothed the lapel of his suit for the 10th time. He wanted this deal to work. He needed the armored transports to secure his stranglehold on the Busan ports. He looked at me, his eyes dark and expectant. He didn't see a person. He saw a utility. He saw a Korean-American girl he'd hired off a secure messaging board because I had a high clearance rating and a reputation for silence. Tell him the money is already in the Cayman account, Park said. His voice was tight. I turned to the men on my right, the Russians. There were 4 of them. They looked like jagged cliffs wrapped in leather and denim. In the center stood Volkov. He was a giant of a man, wide as a doorway, with eyes the color of dirty ice. He was leaning against the hood of a matte black sedan, picking at his fingernails with a serrated knife. Mr. Park says the funds have been transferred to the designated account, I said in English. My voice was level. It was the voice of a machine. Volkov looked up. He didn't look at Park. He looked at me. His gaze crawled over my face, assessing, dismissing. He grinned, revealing a row of teeth capped in gold. Good, Volkov said in heavily accented English. We like prompt payment. Then he turned to the man beside him, a scarred enforcer with a neck tattoo of a burning church. Volkov switched to Russian. The shift in his tone was immediate. It went from the stilted, formal English of business to the fluid, guttural slang of the Moscow underworld. Look at her, Volkov said in Russian, stiff as a board. My heart skipped a beat. It was a physical jolt, like missing a step on a staircase. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I stared at the button on Volkov's jacket. She's a pretty doll, the enforcer replied, his voice a low rumble. Plastic, empty head. Probably thinks she's important, Volkov laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. Standing there with her little recorder, does she even know what day it is? My knuckles turned white. I gripped the digital recorder in my hand so hard the plastic creaked. They thought I was deaf to them. They thought I was just another local hire, a tourist in their language. They didn't know I spent my childhood in a bleak apartment block in St. Petersburg. They didn't know I dreamed in Russian before I dreamed in English. I forced my face to remain a mask of bored indifference. I let my eyes glaze over slightly. I had practiced this look in the mirror for years. The vacant interpreter stare. What are they saying? Park asked me in Korean. He sounded suspicious. He hated being left out of the joke. I turned to him. I lied. They are discussing the transport logistics, sir. They seem pleased with the transaction. Park nodded, his ego stroked. He stepped closer to the black sedan. It was the centerpiece of the deal. A customized armored vehicle, a gesture of goodwill from the Volkov Bratva to the Park syndicate. Ask them about the glass, Park commanded. Is it ballistic grade? I turned back to Volkov. Mr. Park inquires about the integrity of the window glass. Volkov pushed himself off the car. He patted the roof lovingly. Tell him it will stop a sniper round from a kilometer away, best in the world. I translated. Park beamed. He reached out, his hand hovering over the driver's side door handle. He wanted to sit in it. He wanted to claim his prize. Volkov leaned in close to his enforcer again. The distance between them closed. Their voices dropped to a whisper. It was the frequency of conspiracy. The ventilation fan overhead whirred rhythmically, masking the sound to anyone who wasn't straining to hear. But I was straining. Every nerve ending in my body was vibrating. Is the timer active? Volkov murmured in Russian. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air in the garage suddenly felt freezing. Active and running, the enforcer whispered back. 3 minutes, wired to the ignition too. If he turns the key, boom. If he waits 3 minutes, boom. My breath hitched. I caught it before it could become a gasp. My lungs felt like they were filled with concrete. A bomb. They weren't selling a fleet. They were decapitating the competition. And the girl? The enforcer asked. He jerked his chin toward me. Volkov shrugged. The motion was casual, terrifyingly casual. Collateral, who cares? She's just furniture. Burn her with the rest of the trash. I felt the blood drain from my face. My extremities went cold. I could feel the pulse thudding against my collarbone, a frantic drumbeat against my skin. Furniture, trash, burn her. Park's fingers were inches from the handle. He was smiling. He was thinking about how powerful he would look driving this car through the streets of Busan. He was seconds away from vaporizing us all. Time dilated. I saw the dust motes dancing in the beam of the headlights. I smelled the cheap cologne Park wore. I saw the cruel amusement in Volkov's eyes as he watched Park reach for his death. I had a choice. The interpreter's code is absolute. We are neutral. We are ghosts. We do not intervene. If I spoke, I would burn my career. If I spoke, I would mark myself as a target for the Russian Mafia for the rest of my short life. But if I stayed silent, I died in 3 minutes. Fear is a cold thing, but anger is hot. Anger is molten. It surged up from my stomach, burning through the fear, burning through the professional veneer I had spent 10 years perfecting. I wasn't furniture. I wasn't a doll. I took a step forward. The sound of my heels striking the concrete echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence of my mind. I unlocked my hands. I let the digital recorder drop into my pocket. I turned my head slowly. I looked directly at Volkov. I didn't look through him. I looked into him. I let the mask fall. I let the intelligence, the rage, and the comprehension flood into my eyes. Volkov saw it. His smirk faltered. His eyes widened a fraction. He saw the shift. He realized the mistake. I turned to Park. My voice didn't tremble. It was steel. "Mr. Park," I said. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Park stopped. His hand froze on the chrome handle. He looked at me, confused by the sudden break in protocol. "What is it?" "Do not open that door," I said in Korean. My voice echoed off the damp walls. "Back away from the vehicle now." "What?" Park frowned. "Odessa, what are you doing?" I didn't answer him. I turned back to Volkov. The Russian was reaching inside his jacket. His hand was going for a weapon. He knew the game was up. I switched languages. I let the Russian roll off my tongue, sharp and jagged and perfect. "You called me a doll," I said in Russian. The sound of his native tongue coming from my mouth hit him like a physical blow. He froze. His mouth opened slightly. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. "You said I was furniture," I hissed, stepping closer to him, fueled by an adrenaline high that felt like lightning. "You said I was trash to be burned." "You," Volkov stammered in Russian, "you understand." "I understand everything," I snapped. I whipped my head back to Park, who was staring at us, bewildered by the sudden shift in power dynamics. I pointed a shaking finger at the matte black sedan. "Run!" I screamed in Korean, my voice shredding the air. "The car is a bomb." I'm Katia Thorne, 26 years old, and I just signed my own death warrant in 3 different languages to save a man who thinks I'm nothing more than office furniture. The last syllable of my scream was still bouncing off the concrete walls when the atmosphere in the garage shattered. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Park Yi-ho stared at me, his hand hovering inches from the chrome door handle of the sedan, his face a mask of insulted confusion. He didn't understand. He thought I had snapped. He thought his obedient little translator had lost her mind. But Volkov understood. I saw the shift in the Russian's eyes. The shock of hearing his mother tongue from my mouth vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, predatory calculation of a man who needed to tie up a loose end. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He reached into his jacket, his movement a blur of leather and violence. "Get down!" I shrieked, launching myself at Park. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. My body was moving on pure instinct, driven by the adrenaline flooding my veins. I slammed into Park's side, my shoulder digging into his ribs. He was heavy, dead weight, completely unprepared for the impact. We hit the oil-stained floor together, a tangle of limbs and expensive fabric. Crack, crack, crack. 3 gunshots ripped through the air where Park's head had been a second ago. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. I felt the percussion in my teeth. The sparks showered down on us as the bullets sparked off the armored plating of the car, the very car Park had been so eager to touch. "Are you insane?" Park roared, trying to shove me off him. His face was red, his eyes bulging. "You attacked me." I grabbed his lapels, yanking him down as another bullet chipped the concrete inches from my ear. Concrete dust stung my cheek. "Listen to me," I yelled in Korean, my voice raw. "The car isn't just a transport, it's a coffin." I dragged him behind a stack of industrial crates, my heels scraping against the floor. My breath came in ragged gasps. I could hear Volkov shouting orders in Russian, his voice booming over the chaos. "Kill them both, don't let them reach the exit." I looked at Park. He was trembling, shock finally overriding his ego. "What did they say?" Park whispered, his voice shaking. "What did you hear?" "The whisper," I hissed, checking the corner of the crate. I could see the shadows of the Russians moving, flanking us. Volkov told his lieutenant the tracking frequency is already set. The C4 is wired directly to the ignition of the lead vehicle. Park's face went pale, the color draining away like water down a drain. The ignition, he choked out. If you had turned that key, we would be pink mist right now, I said, my words coming out fast, sharp, and terrified. But that's not all. They weren't just going to kill you here. They set the timer to wait until you were 5 blocks away. I looked him dead in the eye. I needed him to understand the scale of the betrayal. I needed him to understand that his empire was crumbling in real time. They wanted you on the highway, I continued, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They wanted you surrounded by your lieutenants. They planned to erase your entire leadership team from the map in one single blast. It's a decapitation strike, Park. They aren't selling you cars. They're selling you your own funeral. Park looked at the black sedan gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It looked so powerful, so safe. It was a Trojan horse made of steel and leather. My team, Park muttered. They're waiting outside. And they're next, I said. A bullet smashed into the crate above our heads, sending splinters raining down into my hair. I flinched, curling tighter into a ball. I could smell the cordite now, acrid and burning. My hands were shaking, but my mind was strangely clear. The vacant interpreter was dead. She died the moment I opened my mouth. Now there was only the survivor. We can't stay here, I said. Volkov knows I heard everything. He knows I know the frequency. I'm the only witness to his betrayal. Why? Park asked, looking at me with a strange new intensity. Why save me? You're just hired help. Because I'm not furniture, I snapped, the anger flaring up again, hot and bright. And I'm not trash. I peeked around the crate. The enforcer with the church tattoo was advancing on our left, a suppressed pistol in his hand. He was moving with professional calm. He thought we were trapped rats. I looked at the recorder in my pocket. I had the confession, I had the whisper, but it wouldn't matter if we died in this basement. Mr. Park, I said, grabbing his arm. Do you have a weapon? Park hesitated, then reached to his ankle holster. He pulled out a compact pistol. It looked ridiculously small against the firepower the Russians were packing. Good, I said. On my count, you fire at the overhead lights, plunge the garage into darkness. And then we run, I said, tightening my grip on my shoes, preparing to sprint for my life. We run like hell. I'm Katia Thorne, 26 years old, and I just signed my own death warrant in 3 different languages to save a man who thinks I'm nothing more than office furniture. The last syllable of my scream was still bouncing off the concrete walls when the atmosphere in the garage shattered. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Park Yi-ho stared at me, his hand hovering inches from the chrome door handle of the sedan, his face a mask of insulted confusion. He didn't understand. He thought I had snapped. He thought his obedient little translator had lost her mind. But Volkov understood. I saw the shift in the Russian's eyes. The shock of hearing his mother tongue from my mouth vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, predatory calculation of a man who needed to tie up a loose end. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He reached into his jacket, his movement a blur of leather and violence. Get down, I shrieked, launching myself at Park. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. My body was moving on pure instinct, driven by the adrenaline flooding my veins. I slammed into Park's side, my shoulder digging into his ribs. He was heavy, dead weight, completely unprepared for the impact. We hit the oil-stained floor together, a tangle of limbs and expensive fabric. Crack, crack, crack. 3 gunshots ripped through the air where Park's head had been a second ago. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. I felt the percussion in my teeth. Sparks showered down on us as the bullets sparked off the armored plating of the car, the very car Park had been so eager to touch. "Are you insane?" Park roared, trying to shove me off him. His face was red, his eyes bulging. "You attacked me." I grabbed his lapels, yanking him down as another bullet chipped the concrete inches from my ear. Concrete dust stung my cheek. "Listen to me," I yelled in Korean, my voice raw. "The car isn't just a transport, it's a coffin." I dragged him behind a stack of industrial crates, my heels scraping against the floor. My breath came in ragged gasps. I could hear Volkov shouting orders in Russian, his voice booming over the chaos. "Kill them both, don't let them reach the exit, flash the flanks." I looked at Park. He was trembling, shock finally overriding his ego. He looked at the bullet holes in the floor, then at me. "What did they say?" Park whispered, his voice shaking. "What did you hear?" "The whisper," I hissed, checking the corner of the crate. I could see the shadows of the Russians moving, flanking us. "Volkov told his lieutenant the tracking frequency is already set. The C4 is wired directly to the ignition of the lead vehicle." Park's face went pale, the color draining away like water down a drain. "The ignition," he choked out. "If you had turned that key, we would be pink mist right now," I said, my words coming out fast, sharp, and terrified. "But that's not all. They weren't just going to kill you here. They set the timer to wait until you were 5 blocks away." I looked him dead in the eye. I needed him to understand the scale of the betrayal. I needed him to understand that his empire was crumbling in real time. "They wanted you on the highway," I continued, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "They wanted you surrounded by your lieutenants. They planned to erase your entire leadership team from the map in one single blast. It's a decapitation strike, Park. They aren't selling you cars, they're selling you your own funeral." Park looked at the black sedan gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It looked so powerful, so safe. It was a Trojan horse made of steel and leather. "My team," Park muttered. "They're waiting outside." "And they're next," I said. A bullet smashed into the crate above our heads, sending splinters raining down into my hair. I flinched, curling tighter into a ball. I could smell the cordite now, acrid and burning. My hands were shaking, but my mind was strangely clear. The vacant interpreter was dead. She died the moment I opened my mouth. Now there was only the survivor. "We can't stay here," I said. "Volkov knows I heard everything. He knows I know the frequency. I'm the only witness to his betrayal." "Why?" Park asked, looking at me with a strange new intensity. "Why save me? You're just hired help." "Because I'm not furniture," I snapped, the anger flaring up again, hot and bright. "And I'm not trash." I peeked around the crate. The enforcer with the church tattoo was advancing on our left, a suppressed pistol in his hand. He was moving with professional calm. He thought we were trapped rats. I looked at the recorder in my pocket. I had the confession, I had the whisper, but it wouldn't matter if we died in this basement. "Mr. Park," I said, grabbing his arm, "do you have a weapon?" Park hesitated, then reached to his ankle holster. He pulled out a compact pistol. It looked ridiculously small against the firepower the Russians were packing. "Good," I said. "On my count, you fire at the overhead lights, plunge the garage into darkness. And then we run," I said, tightening my grip on my shoes, preparing to sprint for my life. "We run like hell." I'm Katia Thorne, 26 years old, and I was supposed to be the invisible woman in the corner of the room, not the one holding a loaded silence against a Russian kill squad. "Now," I screamed. Park squeezed the trigger. The compact pistol barked 3 times, the muzzle flashes blinding in the dim garage. Pop, pop, pop. Above us, the fluorescent tubes shattered, raining sparks and glass down onto the concrete. The garage plunged into sudden, suffocating darkness. Move. I hissed, grabbing Park's sleeve. We scrambled away from the crates, our footsteps echoing wetly on the oil-slicked floor. I was blind, navigating by memory and the terrifying sound of Russians shouting behind us. I counted the steps in my head, 10 to the pillar, 20 to the ramp. My lungs burned, the air tasting of sulfur and panic. To the left, Park gasped, stumbling against me. The stairwell is to the left. We careened toward the wall, my hand scraping against rough concrete. I felt the cold metal of the door handle. Locked, of course it was locked. They cut the power to the mag locks, I whispered, panic rising in my throat like bile. We're sealed in. A beam of light sliced through the darkness, blindingly bright. Then another. The headlights of the SUVs at the far end of the garage flared to life, pinning us against the wall like insects on a slide. There, a voice shouted in Russian. By the stairwell, we were exposed. There was nowhere left to run. Park raised his small pistol, his hand shaking violently, but I pushed his arm down. There were 6 of them. If he fired now, we would be riddled with bullets before the casing hit the floor. Volkov stepped into the beams of light. He looked colossal, his silhouette elongated by the glare of the headlamps. He walked with the leisurely pace of a man who knows the hunt is over. He stopped 10 feet from us, flanked by 2 men with submachine guns. "Mr. Park," Volkov said, his voice booming, dripping with mock disappointment. He spoke in English now, heavy and thick. Very bad business etiquette, leaving before the toast. Park was hyperventilating, his back pressed against the locked door. You tried to kill me." Volkov shrugged, a gesture of casual cruelty. He turned to the man on his right and spoke in Russian, his voice low and guttural. "Shoot the Korean in the knees first. Make him watch while we peel the girl. She has caused me too much trouble." He looked at me then. He saw a terrified translator in a skirt and heels shivering in the cold light. He saw a victim. He saw absolutely nothing that threatened him. He smirked, turning back to his men to give the order. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a break, it was a realignment. The fear didn't leave, but it froze, turning into a cold, hard block of ice in the center of my chest. I stopped shivering. I stopped hunching. I straightened my spine, letting my arms fall loosely to my sides. "Wait," I said. Volkov paused, looking back at me with amusement. "Begging? I like begging." I took a step forward, stepping away from Park, stepping into the light. I turned my gaze slowly toward Volkov, meeting his icy blue eyes with a stare that had no fear left in it. The air in the garage seemed to thin, the tension stretching until it hummed. I opened my mouth, but the voice that came out wasn't the soft, deferential tone of Katia the translator. It was low, harsh, and precise. "Your flanking maneuver was sloppy, Sergei," I said, switching from my perfect Korean to a sharp, flawless St. Petersburg dialect that sounded like breaking glass. "And your trigger discipline is embarrassing." Volkov froze. His smirk didn't just fade, it evaporated. His eyes widened, the pupils contracting as his brain tried to process the impossible audio coming from the visual in front of him. The 2 gunmen behind him hesitated, their weapons dipping slightly in confusion. I didn't let him recover. I took another step, my heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete, a sound of absolute authority. "You assumed silence was ignorance." I continued in Russian, letting the vowels roll with a native, predatory bite. "You assumed I was just a pretty accessory. That was your first mistake. Your second was wiring the C4 to the ignition coil instead of the pressure plate. Amateur hour." Park was staring at the side of my face as if I had just grown wings, but I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes locked on Volkov. I needed to paralyze him with shock. You should have checked my resume for my time in the GRU, Volkov, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent garage. His face went from smug to ghostly white in a heartbeat. The blood drained from his features so fast he looked like a wax figure. The silence in the garage became deafening as the realization hits him that I have understood every single word they've said for the last 2 hours. I knew his bank accounts. I knew his betrayal. I knew the names of his children he had mentioned over the phone while I poured him tea. "Who are you?" Volkov whispered, his hand drifting instinctively toward his holster, but lacking the speed he had moments ago. He was rattled. He was terrified. "I'm the person who knows about the safe house in Viborg," I said, taking a gamble on the location I'd heard him mutter earlier. "And I'm the person who is going to walk out of here. Or do I need to tell the SVR station chief exactly how much product you've been skimming off the top?" Volkov's eye twitched. I had him. For 3 seconds, I was the biggest monster in the room. "Kill her," he screamed suddenly, his composure shattering. "Kill her now." But the hesitation had cost him. As his men raised their rifles, I didn't flinch. I dropped. "Down!" I yelled at Park, sweeping his legs out from under him. As we hit the floor, the shadows behind the SUVs erupted. A new sound tore through the garage, not the sharp crack of Russian gunfire, but the deep, thumping roar of a heavy-caliber shotgun. The gunman to Volkov's right spun around, his chest exploding in a spray of red mist. Park's team hadn't been waiting outside. They had been waiting in the shadows of the ramp, listening to the darkness, waiting for a signal. And Volkov's scream had been it. "I'm Katia Thorne, 26 years old, and 5 minutes ago I was just a terrified interpreter. But now I'm the only thing keeping a Korean crime lord from turning the ignition on a Russian car bomb." The roar of the shotgun blast didn't just break the silence, it shattered the reality of the garage. The sound was physical, a concussive wave that punched the air from my lungs. I felt the wet spray of the gunman's blood mist across my cheek before my brain even registered that he was dead. The heavy metallic tang of copper filled my mouth. Park was scrambling on the oil-slicked concrete next to me, his expensive suit ruined, his eyes wide with the primal terror of a hunted animal. He wasn't looking at the gunmen emerging from the shadows. He was looking at the armored Mercedes. To him, that car was still a sanctuary. It was steel. It was bulletproof. It was escape. I saw the muscle in his leg tense. He was going to make a break for the driver's side door. "No!" I screamed, the Korean tearing out of my throat raw and jagged. He ignored me, his hand reaching out, fingers clawing at the air toward the door handle. In his mind, he was 3 seconds away from safety. In my mind, he was 3 seconds away from vaporizing us both. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I lunged, grabbing the lapel of his ruined jacket and yanking him back with a strength I didn't know I possessed. We slammed back into the hard concrete wall, my shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. Pain flared hot and sharp, but I shoved it down into the ice block in my chest. I looked directly into Park's eyes, ignoring the cacophony of gunfire erupting around us. "The car is a bomb," I shouted in Korean, forcing the words through the panic clouding his gaze. "The ignition is the trigger." The Russians set the timer. Park blinked, the information crashing into him. I saw the betrayal register, followed immediately by horror. He looked at the car, then back at me, his perception of the world tilting on its axis. The vehicle he had paid a fortune for, the symbol of his power, was just a coffin waiting for a spark. Movement in my peripheral vision cut the moment short. Volkov wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was charging. The Russian giant had realized his ambush was crumbling. His men were dropping, caught in the crossfire of Park's hidden enforcement team. He had lost control, and for a man like Volkov, loss of control demanded blood. He didn't care about escape anymore. He wanted to break the thing that had humiliated him. He wanted me. He moved with terrifying speed for a man of his size, a dark blur against the muzzle flashes lighting up the garage. His face was a mask of pure, concentrated hate. His hand was clawing for the heavy pistol at his hip, but he was too close for the draw. He reached out with his left hand, his fingers hooked like talons, aiming for my throat. Time seemed to warp, slowing down into a sludge of adrenaline and hyper-focus. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the dilated pupils of his icy blue eyes. I saw the pulse throbbing in his neck. I didn't retreat. The vacant interpreter would have cowered. The victim would have screamed. I did neither. My right hand was still clenched around the handle of my leather briefcase. It was a thick, sturdy thing loaded with 2 dictionaries, a laptop, and the heavy glass water bottle I hadn't had a chance to open. It was 10 pounds of dead weight. As Volkov lunged, I stepped into his guard. It was counterintuitive. It was dangerous. It was exactly what he didn't expect. I swung the briefcase in a tight, upward arc. I put my hips into it, channeling every ounce of fear and rage into the motion. The leather corner of the case connected with his forearm just as he raised it to grab me. Crack. The sound was sickeningly distinct, a dry snap like a dead branch breaking in a winter storm. It cut through the booming gunfire. Volkov's howl was immediate, a guttural roar of shock and pain. His arm buckled, the bone shattered, rendering the limb useless. He stumbled back, clutching the broken arm to his chest, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at me, and for the first time he didn't see a girl. He saw a threat. "Bitch!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. He fumbled for his gun with his good hand, his movements jerky and desperate. But the window of opportunity had closed. "Get down!" I yelled, shoving Park flat against the floor again. 3 bullets sparked off the concrete wall inches above my head, dusting my hair with pulverized stone. Park's team was advancing, their weapons cycling rhythmically. A wall of lead hammered into the space where Volkov stood. The Russian threw himself behind a concrete pillar, the concrete disintegrating under the impact of the suppression fire. "We have to move," I hissed at Park. Now, the garage was a war zone. The air was thick with gray smoke and the acrid stench of cordite. Shadows danced violently against the walls as muzzle flashes strobed like a nightclub from hell. I couldn't tell who was winning. I didn't care. I just needed an exit that wasn't wired with C4. "The service corridor," Park gasped, pointing a shaking hand toward the far right corner of the garage behind a stack of shipping pallets. "There is a fire exit. It opens to the alley." I grabbed his arm, hauling him up. "Go, stay low." We ran. I ran in heels, my feet screaming in protest, but I didn't kick them off. The floor was covered in glass and debris. Barefoot was a death sentence. I kept my body hunched, making myself a small target. I could hear bullets singing through the air, angry hornets looking for flesh. We reached the pallets. I vaulted over a discarded tire, my breath coming in ragged, burning gasps. Park fumbled with the crash bar on the heavy steel door. "It's jammed," he panicked, slamming his shoulder against it. "Move," I commanded. I didn't finesse it. I kicked the bar with the heel of my shoe, putting my weight behind the strike. The mechanism groaned, rust and disuse protesting, and then the door swung open with a screech of metal on metal. The cool night air hit my face like a blessing. It smelled of rain and wet garbage, the sweetest perfume I had ever encountered. We tumbled out into the alleyway, the sounds of the firefight instantly muffled by the heavy door swinging shut behind us. It was dark, quiet, and wet. Rain was falling in a steady drizzle, slicking the cobblestones. I collapsed against the brick wall, my legs finally turning to jelly. My chest heaved, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling violently. My knuckles were white, still gripping the handle of the briefcase so hard my fingers felt locked. Park slid down the wall opposite me. He looked wrecked. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his suit was torn, and he was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. It wasn't gratitude. It was all mixed with fear. You, he wheezed, wiping blood from a cut on his cheek. You speak Russian, you speak the dialect of the northern gangs. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the rain wash away the dust on my face. St. Petersburg, I corrected, my voice hollow. You knew about the bomb, he said, his voice gaining a little strength. You saved my life. I saved my own life, I said sharply, opening my eyes to glare at him. You just happened to be standing next to me. Who are you? Park asked. The question hung in the damp air between us. It was the same question Volkov had asked. I pushed myself off the wall, straightening my skirt, clutching the briefcase that had just broken a man's arm. I wasn't the invisible woman anymore. I wasn't the furniture. I'm the person who needs a ride, I said, looking down the alley toward the streetlights. And a very large drink. And if you ask me one more question, Mr. Park, I'm going to charge you double for overtime. I'm Saskia Reed, 26 years old, and until tonight, the most dangerous thing I'd ever handled was a confidential merger agreement, not a volatile standoff between rival syndicates. The silence that followed my revelation didn't last. It couldn't. I had just told a Korean warlord that his Russian rival had turned his armored sanctuary into a fragmentation grenade. The air in the garage was so tight it felt like a violin string snapped past its breaking point. Then the world ended. The first gunshot didn't sound like a pop. It sounded like a cannon firing inside a cathedral. The acoustic violence of it slapped against my eardrums, a physical pressure wave that buckled my knees before my brain even processed the threat. I didn't think, I didn't decide. My body was moving on an ancient reptilian instinct I didn't know I possessed. I threw myself to the right, my shoulder slamming into the unforgiving edge of a concrete support pillar. The impact knocked the wind out of me, a sharp burst of pain that radiated down my arm, but it was better than the alternative. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Bullets began to chew through the scenery. I pressed my back against the cold, gritty cement, my chest heaving, my eyes squeezed shut for a split second as the garage erupted into a chaotic symphony of violence. I opened my eyes and looked toward the Mercedes. The car, the beautiful, sleek, black armored beast that Park had been seconds away from entering, was being disassembled. The gunfire coming from the shadows wasn't aiming for us, it was aiming for the vehicle. Heavy caliber rounds punched through the windows, turning the safety glass into a shimmering, deadly mist. The expensive leather upholstery exploded into clouds of white stuffing and black scraps. If I hadn't screamed, if Park had opened that door. A shower of glass rained down on me like frozen rain, tinkling musically as it hit the oil-stained floor. A shard the size of a guitar pick skittered across the concrete and sliced into the back of my hand. I stared at the bead of bright red blood welling up, mesmerized by the color. It was the only thing in this gray, industrial tomb that looked real. Agony, ubit, ik vi sek. Fire, kill them all. The voice was a roar, cutting through the mechanical staccato of automatic weapons. Volkov. I risked a glance around the edge of the pillar. The Russian mob boss was no longer the smug, composed figure who had offered us a deal moments ago. He was a monster unchained. He stood behind the cover of a rusted shipping container about 30 yards away, his face a mask of purple rage. He wasn't holding a gun. My interpreter's brain, trained to hyper-focus on details, latched onto his hands. His left hand was empty, clawing at the air. His right hand was frantically digging into the pocket of his trench coat. Detonator, I whispered, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. He wasn't trying to shoot us. He realized the trap had been sprung too early. He knew Park wasn't in the car, but Volkov was a man of scorched earth. If he couldn't trap the rat, he would blow up the entire maze. On Ishchit detonator. He's looking for the detonator. I screamed the words, but the sound was swallowed by the cacophony. My ears were ringing, a high-pitched whine that drilled into the center of my skull. The air was turning thick and hazy, filled with the acrid, metallic taste of cordite. It burned the back of my throat and stung my eyes. Every breath felt like inhaling sandpaper. I looked for Park. The Korean boss was on the ground near the rear tire of the Mercedes. He was frozen, a statue of disbelief in a ruined Italian suit. He was staring at the car door, now riddled with holes, realizing that his symbol of power had been converted into his coffin. He looked small. He looked mortal. Two of his bodyguards, men who moved with the fluid, terrifying grace of professionals, were already on him. They weren't asking him to move, they were moving him. One guard grabbed Park by the back of his belt while the other seized his collar. They were dragging him backward, away from the kill zone, their own weapons raised and firing blindly into the darkness to suppress Volkov's crew. Park's heels scraped uselessly against the concrete. He wasn't fighting them, but he wasn't helping them either. He was in shock. Then, as he was being hauled across the floor like a sack of grain, his head snapped up. He found me. Our eyes locked across the 20 feet of bullet-strewn concrete separating us. Time seemed to warp, stretching that single second into an eternity. I expected to see anger. I expected to see the cold, calculating look of a man wondering if I was part of the setup. But I saw terror, raw, undiluted terror, and beneath it something else. Something that chilled me more than the gunfire. Respect. It was the look a man gives a witch who has just predicted a lightning strike. He realized in that moment that the girl with the briefcase, the vacant interpreter, had heard the ghost in the machine. He realized that without my voice, he would be nothing more than pink mist on the interior of that Mercedes. Go, I mouthed at him, hugging my knees to my chest as a stray bullet chipped a chunk of concrete off my pillar, dusting my hair with gray powder. Volkov screamed again, a sound of pure frustration. GDE on. GDE pult. Where is it? Where is the remote? He had dropped it. In the scramble, in the adrenaline, the detonator must have slipped from his pocket. I saw Park's men drag him around the corner of a structural wall toward the service exit. He disappeared from view, leaving me alone in the kill box. I was unarmed. I was wearing a pencil skirt and heels. I was armed only with a vocabulary that included 30 words for snow and the syntax for international trade disputes. The firing shifted. With the primary target gone, the suppressing fire from Park's remaining men began to falter. The Russians were advancing. I could hear their boots crunching on the glass. I looked at the exit where Park had vanished. It was too far. If I ran, I'd be cut down before I made it 3 steps. I looked at the Mercedes. It was leaking fluids, oil, gasoline, transmission fluid, pooling rapidly underneath the chassis. I looked at Volkov, who was now on his knees, patting the ground frantically in the darkness, looking for the switch that would end us all. I pressed my back harder against the pillar, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird desperate to break the cage. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a spy. I was Saskia Reed. And if I wanted to see 27, I had to stop thinking in English and start thinking in survival. I'm Saskia Reed, 26 years old, and 5 minutes ago my biggest worry was a coffee stain on my silk blouse. Now I am the only thing standing between a mafia warlord and a crater in the ground. The garage was a deafening echo chamber of gunfire and shouting, but for a split second the world seemed to drop into absolute silence. The only thing I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears, sounding like a roaring river. I pressed my cheek against the cold, rough concrete of the pillar, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps that felt like inhaling broken glass. I peeked around the edge of the column again. Volkov was still on his knees, tearing at the ground, screaming for the detonator, his voice cracking with a desperation that terrified me more than his anger. But my eyes didn't linger on the boss. They drifted to the shadows behind him, drawn by a flash of movement near a stack of old tires. It was Yuri. I knew his name because I had translated his drink order 3 hours ago. He was Volkov's lieutenant, a man with a neck as thick as a tree stump and eyes that looked like they had seen the bottom of a grave. He wasn't shooting. He was standing half-crouched, staring at something in his hand. My stomach dropped so hard I felt weightless. It was a small, black plastic rectangle. It looked harmless, like a garage door opener or a key fob for a cheap sedan. But I saw the red LED light blinking on the top, a tiny, rhythmic pulse of doom in the gloom of the warehouse. The detonator. Yuri's thumb hovered over the center button. He looked confused, his brow furrowed, his eyes darting from the Mercedes to Volkov's back. He was waiting for the order, or perhaps he was just too stunned by the ambush to know what he was holding. But I saw the muscles in his forearm tense. I saw the intention forming in his brain. He was going to press it. He wasn't going to wait for Volkov to find it. He was going to end this right now. I calculated the distance. 20 feet, maybe 25. The floor between us was a treacherous killing field of oil, transmission fluid, and shattered safety glass. If I stayed here, I died. The blast radius of a car bomb in an enclosed space like this wouldn't just kill us, it would vaporize us. There would be nothing left to bury, just a scorch mark on the floor where Saskia Reed used to be. If I ran for the exit, I died. I'd never make it out of the blast zone in time. My brain, usually reserved for analyzing syntax and diplomatic nuance, suddenly switched to a frequency I had never used before. It was raw. It was violent. It was pure survival. I didn't make a conscious decision to move. My legs just fired. I pushed off the pillar, abandoning my cover. I stayed low, my body hunched over, moving with a desperate, scrambling speed. My heels clicked loudly on the concrete, a staccato rhythm that sounded like a dinner bell for every gunman in the room, but the noise of the firefight masked my approach. I hit the patch of oil. My right foot slid out from under me. I flailed, my arms windmilling, and I crashed hard onto my hip. The pain was a sharp, hot spike that shot up my spine, but the adrenaline washed it away instantly. I was on my hands and knees now, the viscous black sludge soaking into my skirt, ruining the fabric, coating my skin. I looked up. Yuri hadn't seen me yet. He was raising the remote higher, his thumb descending toward the button. I needed a weapon. My hand scrabbled blindly across the filth of the floor. My fingers brushed against broken glass, slicing my skin, but I didn't pull back. Then my hand closed around something cold and cylindrical. A pipe. A rusted 2-foot length of galvanized steel, likely dropped by a mechanic years ago and forgotten in the grime. It was heavy. It felt real. I gripped it so hard my knuckles turned white. I pushed myself up, my feet slipping and sliding in the oil, my movement clumsy and frantic. I wasn't a ninja. I wasn't an assassin. I was a terrified interpreter in a pencil skirt, and I was running on pure terror. I lunged the last 5 feet. Nyet, I screamed, the Russian word tearing out of my throat. Yuri's head snapped toward me. His eyes went wide. He saw the girl, he saw the pipe. But his reflexes were too slow. His brain couldn't process the anomaly of me attacking him fast enough to send the signal to his hand. I swung the pipe. I didn't aim. I didn't use technique. I put every ounce of fear, every ounce of rage, every ounce of the vacant woman frustration into that swing. The metal connected with the side of his head with a sickening, wet thud that vibrated all the way up my arms to my shoulders. Yuri crumbled. He didn't fall like they do in the movies, he just turned off. His knees buckled and he collapsed sideways into the tires. The remote flew from his hand. I watched it in slow motion. It tumbled through the air, end over end, the little red light spinning like a tiny, evil star. It hit the concrete with a plastic clatter and skittered away, sliding across the slick floor toward the Mercedes. Toward the bomb. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded my veins. If it slid too far, I couldn't reach it. If someone else picked it up. I threw myself forward again. I didn't run, I dove. I launched my body across the wet concrete, my palms slapping the ground, my chest heaving. I scrambled on all fours, my fingers scraping against the rough floor, chasing the sliding black plastic. It spun to a stop near a pool of gasoline leaking from the Mercedes tank. I lunged. My hand missed it by an inch. I scrambled forward, my knees screaming in protest. I saw a shadow fall over me. I didn't look up. I knew who it was. I could feel the heat of his rage radiating like a furnace. I rolled onto my back, bringing my heel down with everything I had left. Crunch. The sound was small, insignificant compared to the gunfire, but to me, it was the loudest sound in the world. I felt the plastic casing shatter under the heel of my stiletto. I ground my foot down, twisting it, feeling the electronics snap and crush beneath my weight. I pulverized the circuit board into dust. The red light died. The bomb was dead. I lay there on the cold floor, chest heaving, my legs tangled, my clothes destroyed, covered in oil and blood and sweat. I looked up. Volkov was standing directly over me. He wasn't looking at the remote. He wasn't looking at his fallen lieutenant. He was looking at me. His face was a mask of soot and sweat, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. In his right hand he held a chrome-plated pistol. The barrel was enormous. It looked like a cannon. He slowly lowered the gun until the black hole of the muzzle was pointed directly at the center of my forehead. The silence returned. The shooting had stopped. Everyone was watching. I stared up into the barrel of the gun, my heart hammering against my ribs like a prisoner rioting in a cell. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. You, Volkov whispered, and the word sounded like a curse. You speak Russian. I swallowed the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice trembling but audible. I told you, I rasped. The car is a bomb. I'm Saskia Reed, 26 years old, and right now I'm staring down the barrel of a chrome-plated pistol held by a man who wants to paint the garage floor with my brains. The world had narrowed down to the black circle of the muzzle. I could see the rifling inside the barrel. I could see the microscopic scratches on the metal slide. I could see the tension in Volkov's index finger as it began to apply 3 pounds of pressure to the trigger. I didn't pray. I didn't see my life flash before my eyes. I just stared at that finger, watching the tendon in his knuckle turn white, knowing that the electrical signal to end my life had already left his brain and was traveling down his arm. I flinched, my eyes squeezing shut tight, my body bracing for the impact that would turn the lights out forever. Crack. The sound was sharp, dry, and incredibly loud, but I didn't feel the bullet. I felt a warm, wet spray hit my face, smelling of copper and salt. My eyes snapped open. Volkov was still standing there, but the gun was gone. His right shoulder had disintegrated into a mess of red pulp and shredded suit fabric. He stared at the empty space where his hand had been a second ago, his expression one of profound confusion, as if he couldn't understand why his arm was no longer obeying him. Then the pain hit him. He let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a guttural, wet roar that started deep in his chest and tore through his throat. He staggered back, his knees hitting the concrete, clutching the ruin of his shoulder. The chrome pistol lay on the floor next to my knee, sliding slightly in the oil. I scrambled backward on my hands and heels, my breath coming in high-pitched wheezes. I looked past Volkov. Standing 20 yards away near the heavy steel exit door was the man in the gray suit, Park's shadow, the enforcer who had frisked me earlier. He held a suppressed pistol in a two-handed grip, the smoke curling lazily from the end of the silencer. He hadn't left with Park. He had stayed behind in the dark, waiting, watching. The garage erupted into motion. It was over in seconds. Park's men, who I assumed had fled, materialized from the shadows like ghosts. They swarmed the remaining Russians. There was no negotiation, there were no Miranda rights. It was brutal, efficient violence. Gun butts cracked against skulls. Men were swept off their feet and pinned to the oil-slicked concrete. Yuri was still unconscious by the tires. Volkov was on his knees, groaning, blood pouring through his fingers. I was alone in the center of the chaos, sitting in a puddle of transmission fluid, surrounded by shattered glass and the wreckage of a Mafia peace treaty. I tried to stand up. My legs felt like they were made of water. I slipped, my hand catching the bumper of the Mercedes to steady myself. I was shaking so hard my teeth clattered together. The adrenaline that had fueled my pipe swing and my dive for the detonator was evaporating, leaving behind a cold, hollow shock. The heavy steel door creaked open again. The fighting stopped. The shouting died down. The only sounds were Volkov's ragged breathing and the drip, drip, drip of gasoline from the Mercedes. Park walked back into the room. He didn't look like a man who had just been in a firefight. His suit was unruffled. He walked with a calm, terrifying grace, stepping carefully over the broken glass. He didn't look at his men. He didn't look at the bleeding Russians. He walked straight toward me. I pressed my back against the cold metal of the car. I was covered in filth, black oil smeared across my face, blood on my blouse, my skirt torn. I must have looked like a maniac. Park stopped 5 feet away. He looked down at the floor. He looked at the smashed remains of the black plastic remote control. He saw the crushed circuit board, the pulverized plastic casing, the way my stiletto heel had ground it into the concrete dust. He looked at the Mercedes. His eyes tracked the leak from the gas tank, the pool of fuel expanding toward us. He put it together instantly. He realized that while his men were securing the perimeter, I had been the only one securing our lives. He looked up at me. His face was unreadable, a stone mask, but his eyes were sharp, assessing me in a way he hadn't before. Before I was furniture, I was a mouthpiece. Now I was something else. He said something in Korean to the enforcer in the gray suit. The man nodded and lowered his weapon slightly. Then Park turned his gaze to Volkov. 2 of Park's men hauled the Russian boss up to his knees. Volkov's face was gray with shock, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes were burning with hate. He looked at Park, then he looked at me. The realization hit Volkov like a second bullet. "You," Volkov wheezed, his voice thick with pain. He switched to English, his accent heavy and slurred. You understood. I pushed myself off the car, standing on my own 2 feet. My hip throbbed where I had landed on it, and my hands were stinging from the glass cuts, but I lifted my chin. I wasn't going to cower, not anymore. Every word I said, my voice was raspy, but it didn't shake. I understood kill the girl. I understood check the perimeter. And I understood when you told Yuri to blow the car. Volkov spat a glob of bloody saliva onto the floor near my feet. Bitch, who are you working for? CIA? SVR. I'm a freelancer, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. And you didn't pay your invoice. Park stepped closer to me, the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the smell of gasoline. He reached into his jacket pocket. I flinched, expecting a weapon. He pulled out a pristine white handkerchief. He held it out to me. I stared at the white cloth, then at his face. It was a gesture of civility in a room that reeked of death. It was an acknowledgement. I took it. My fingers left black oil stains on the white cot. I wiped the grime from my cheek, watching him. You saved my life, Park said. His English was perfect. Accentless, smooth. I froze. He hadn't spoken a word of English the entire meeting. He had forced me to translate every syllable, making me the filter for all the aggression, all the insults. He had played us all. He had understood everything Volkov said, just like I had. You speak English, I whispered. And you speak Russian, Park replied, a ghost of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. It seems we both have our secrets, Miss Reed. He turned back to Volkov. The smile vanished. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. This man tried to kill me in my own city, Park said softly. He rigged a car bomb to a peace summit. He insulted my intelligence. Park looked at the enforcer. Load him into the van, the others, too. We will discuss the terms of their surrender in a more private location. And the girl? The enforcer asked, his voice rough. Park looked back at me. I held my breath. I was the loose end. I was the witness. I was the one who knew too much. By all the rules of the underworld, I shouldn't leave this garage alive. Park's eyes drifted to the crushed detonator on the floor, then back to my face. The girl, Park said, is the only reason we aren't smoke and ash right now. She is not a prisoner. He buttoned his jacket. She is a guest. He gestured toward the exit. Come, Miss Reed, you look like you could use a drink, and I believe we have a new contract to negotiate. I looked at the gun on the floor. I looked at Volkov being dragged away, his heels scraping through the oil. I looked at the exit. I dropped the dirty handkerchief on top of the crushed detonator. After you, I said. I stepped over a pile of shattered safety glass, the crunching sound echoing like grinding bones in the sudden quiet of the garage. My heels felt unsteady on the slick concrete, but I forced my spine straight. The air was thick with the copper tang of blood and the stinging fumes of raw gasoline, a cocktail that burned the back of my throat. Park waited for me by the heavy steel door. He didn't rush. He didn't check his watch. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching his men zip-tie Volkov's wrists with brutal efficiency. Volkov groaned, a wet, bubbling sound as they hauled him upright. His eyes found mine one last time. There was no more arrogance in them, only the terrified realization of a prey animal that had misjudged the predator. Park spoke to the Russians without even looking at them. You are dead men, he said softly. The words weren't a threat, they were a statement of fact, as casual as commenting on the weather. You are ghosts who haven't realized you've been buried yet. He signaled to the enforcer in the gray suit. Take them. I don't want to see them again until the work is finished. The enforcer nodded. Volkov and his bleeding crew were dragged toward the back exit, their shoes screeching against the floor. I watched them go, feeling a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. I had just signed their death warrants. I had swung that pipe and I had stomped that detonator, and because of me, they were going to die in a basement somewhere. I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited for the nausea. It didn't come. Instead, I felt a surge of terrifying clarity. Park turned his attention entirely to me. The garage was clearing out, leaving just the two of us near the main exit. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. He extended his right hand toward me. It wasn't a gesture of chivalry. He wasn't offering to help a damsel over a puddle. His palm was open, his fingers steady. It was the hand a king offers to a general. It was an invitation to the hierarchy. I looked at his hand. It was manicured clean, the skin smooth. I looked at my own. My knuckles were white, my skin smeared with black grease and specks of Volkov's blood. I was a mess, a disaster in a ruined skirt, but Park was looking at me with a reverence I had never seen in his eyes before. "You possess a rare talent, Miss Reed," Park said, his voice low. "Most people hear only noise, you hear intent. You saved my empire tonight." He took a step closer. "I owe you a life debt," he continued. "Name your price." "Money, safe passage back to America, a new identity, tell me what you want." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum beat that threatened to deafen me. This was it. The crossroads. I could take the money. I could run. I could go back to being a ghost, disappearing into some Midwestern suburb to shudder every time a car backfired, or I could stay. I looked at the oil stain on the floor where I had almost died. I thought about the adrenaline coursing through my veins, the electric snap of power I felt when I realized I held the key to the entire room. I wasn't just a translator anymore. I wasn't just a mouthpiece for dangerous men. I looked Park in the eye. "I don't want money," I said, my voice was steel. "And I don't want to run." Park tilted his head slightly, intrigued. "Then what?" I reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm, cool, and solid. I squeezed back, smearing his pristine skin with the grime of the fight. "I want the Russian contracts," I said. Park's eyebrows lifted a fraction of an inch. "Volkov is gone," I pressed, the words tumbling out with sudden, fierce logic. "His network is going to fracture. You need someone who knows their language. You need someone who knows their codes, their insults, their lies. You need a bridge." I stepped closer, not breaking eye contact. "I want the contracts. I want the import rights. And I want a seat at your table, not behind it, not translating for it, at it." Park stared at me for a long, silent moment. He looked at our joined hands, then back at my face. A slow, shark-like smile spread across his lips. It was the smile of a man who had just discovered a weapon he didn't know he had. "The Russian sector is a pit of vipers," he warned. "I just defused a bomb with a high heel," I countered. "I think I can handle snakes." Park laughed. It was a genuine, dry sound. He gave my hand a single, firm shake. "Done," he said. He released me and pushed open the heavy steel door. The cool night air hit me like a physical blow, rushing into my lungs, cleansing the taste of death from my mouth. We stepped out onto the wet pavement of the alleyway. The city of Seoul towered above us, a canyon of neon lights and glass humming with energy. In the distance, the wail of police sirens began to rise, a mournful chorus closing in on the garage. They were too late. The war was already over. The pieces had already moved. I walked beside Park toward the waiting limousine, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the asphalt. I didn't look back at the garage. I didn't look back at the girl I was when I walked in there an hour ago. She was gone, left behind in the oil and the broken glass. I slid into the leather seat of the car, the city lights reflecting in my eyes. I am Saskia Reed. And as the door slammed shut, sealing me in with the most dangerous man in the city, I knew that my name would never be whispered lightly in Seoul again.